Hello, I am Ricky Church with Flickering Myth, and I'm here today with author Dr. Lydia Kang, who has written Star Wars The High Republic Cataclysm. So, hi, Lydia, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So, all right, let's just dive into it.
Okay.
Star Wars is obviously one of the most popular franchises ever. And like, it's funny that today, of all days, we're speaking on May the 4th.
We are. I know. May the
Yeah.
4th be with you.
What's it like for you to join the galaxy far, far away with Cataclysm?
Oh my God, it's incredible. It's sometimes I kind of can't believe like I'm on this side. Like, it's been a month since the book came out, books
Mhm,
already written, it's been published, there was just a lot of work that went into it. And I think
mhm,
it felt surreal pretty much every step of the way.
mhm,
And I think it's starting to feel a little bit more like, okay, yeah, this is the reality. I'm a Star Wars author now. So it's just amazing. I can't complain. It's fantastic.
mhm. Yeah, and the High Republic, this era is such like a new uh facet of Star Wars, which has grown kind of immensely popular in such a short amount of time. Like we're seeing it mentioned now in some of the live action shows. It's kind of prominent in the new game Jedi Survivor. Um, so, what's it like to um, take part in the High Republic project, and like how was your kind of teamwork with like the Lucasfilm story group and the other High Republic authors?
So it's been an incredible process. It's obviously a really new thing for me. My love of Star Wars has always been with starting with like the movies and all of the groundwork that was
Mhm,
done um, around that era. And so to write something that is like really, really new to go back in time
mhm,
felt pretty special because I write a lot of historical fiction, and
mhm,
so in some ways this is writing history, like Star Wars history. So it felt kind of near and dear to my heart to be able to make my mark and write some of this sort of history in this galaxy. And all along the way, I was pretty nervous about writing the book. I was pretty nervous about getting started in the Star Wars world as an author. Previously, when I had done the short story, it's such a small piece of work compared to doing a full length novel, and so I wasn't really sure what to expect. But it's been really like a labor of love, and there have been many, many parties involved in making sure that the book works out. So I have been working with all the other Luminous authors, making sure stories match up, asking a lot of questions oftentimes, just to make sure I'm getting things straight. Um, and there's so many people in the background working really, really hard. So story group, Tom Haler, my editor, many other editors actually at Del Rey who are also working sort of behind the scenes quietly. So it's really like, whenever you write something like this, it's not done in isolation. Even when you write a regular book outside of the Star Wars universe, it's
mhm,
not an isolated thing. But that being said, I'm still usually writing a book all by myself, and this is very, very different because again, the world doesn't belong to me. I didn't make it.
mhm.
Um, and so yeah, it's a very complex but very fun process going through, working with all these different players. It's been pretty cool.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And I think like you were recently at Star Wars Celebration, right?
Yes, I
Like
was.
just
Yes.
after the book was published. So what was that experience like for you to go not as a fan, but like as an actual like part of the team, like just as your book's being released?
It was really unbelievable because I this was my first celebration, and people were telling me like, oh, it's going to be overwhelming, like you will be overwhelmed, and I was. So as a fan, just it was already like a very, very big deal just to step onto, at Excel and see all the banners everywhere and see,
Mhm,
the amazing cosplays. You're just in a sea of cosplayers that are just have these incredible, just incredible work done. And then in the middle of that, I'm being shuttled here and shuttled there to like do signings, to talk on
Mhm.
this panel. And so I just, in a lot of ways, I felt so special, so well taken care of, and honestly, so well loved by the fans. I didn't know what to expect because I was so new to the High Republic and as an author. And I was just really like, I felt like I was just enveloped into the family. People were just happy to see me. I was so happy to see them. It was just like, joy, joy, joy. It was like every day was like a joyful day. It was incredible. It was exhausting, but like
Nice.
awesome. Yeah.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah, I was at Celebration 2019, the year Rise of Skywalker came out, which like my first celebration, that was huge and overwhelming. So I definitely get that
Wow.
feeling.
Yeah, yeah,
So as for Cataclysm, this is a story that builds right out of the ending of Battle of Jeddah.
Yes.
And with a story like that, how did you like raise the stakes of like what could be even more stressful and deadly than that battle? And uh, yeah, like just even exploring that the Jedi's like frustration with all the
Yeah.
events more.
Yeah. So, we like I knew already that I mean, the book's called Cataclysm, so things had to get bigger. They had to go broader, bigger, and more intense. And so that was always the intention, that this was going to like we had sort of leaked or had hinted, like, all roads lead to Delna, and it's a
Hmm.
very foreboding feeling. And so we knew that like things were going to escalate above and beyond what had happened in Convergence, above and beyond what had happened in Battle of Jeddah. So one of the things that we did was, we took a lot of the threads of the different characters that were in the books. And so in Battle of Jeddah, you really see Creighton's son, you see Ada Forte doing their thing, but you also see their frustration with what had happened. And so we were going to sort of take that frustration and just build on it for Cataclysm, like how Creighton was going to feel about how things went down in Jeddah, and he was like unhappy about that. And now wanting to feel like you need to do something because he suspects the path of the open hand is involved in that.
Hmm.
And so running into Cataclysm, he's got all that sort of discomfort and bad feeling, and like really wanting to resolve it, and
Yeah.
wondering and questioning, what kind of Jedi is he? Is he doing a good job? Are his choices correct? And so
Hmm.
that's like a little snippet of sort of like one of the many storylines that went into Cataclysm about how we made things bigger. Um, same thing with like in Convergence. You get to meet the two chancellors, you get to see how the Republic is trying to weave and work their sort of good intentions on the planets of Eiram and E'ronoh. But in Cataclysm, we escalate everything, right? So planets are back at war. Now things are happening. The chancellors can't talk to each other, and these huge life and death decisions are happening to both of them, with respect to the planets that they're working with and respect to their own personal lives. So yeah, basically that's the bottom line, is that we just went bigger and more violent and like just raise the stakes for every single person. At the end of Convergence, at the end of Battle of Jeddah, we just took that and we're like, okay, we're just going to pelt them with a lot more to deal with and see how they come out of it.
Hmm. Yeah, and you kind of mentioned it, but with like the war between the two planets and like what they call the Forever War, how
Mm-hmm.
this conflict just seems to keep going and going and going.
Yeah.
There's reading Convergence and then Cataclysm. It's like there's almost this Shakespearean kind of quality to it, like a little like Romeo and Juliet with Phan-tu and Xiri, and
Yes.
how their families are like just even more so in this book. I feel just not willing to listen to each other and just like, oh no, we have to fight, we have to win. They're in the wrong,
Right.
It's and Phan-tu and Xiri are caught in the middle trying to like stop this fighting. So how did you tap into like their characters, Phan-tu and Xiri, and did you draw like any influences from like Shakespeare or other literature into like their story?
Well, I had a lot of conversations with Zoraida, who wrote Convergence, over what was happening with Xiri and Phan-tu. Um, Interestingly, I was a little bit affected by the fact that, there were a lot of fans of Xiri and Phan-tu, and their sort of star-crossed love, that kind of a thing.
Mm,
It's funny because Shakespeare is very tragic, so there's a lot of really, really intense stuff happening in Shakespeare. Many, many times things do not end well, right? And so you can't, you have to decide whether or not the story deserves an ending that has a tragedy at its conclusion, right? And that doesn't always serve the story well, depending on how you're writing it. And so for me, it was really more about tapping into where they were at the end of the book, where they were at the end of Convergence, how they were feeling about each other, and how they felt with respect to their planets. And knowing that when you marry two people who are the prince and princess of these kingdoms, of these like gigantic forces, these planets, that it's not going to go well. It's not going to be, in any normal marriage, like, maybe it's a fairy tale marriage, but like, not everything goes swimmingly perfect during that first year. And I wanted the reality of that to be on the page. Like, it's not going to go perfect. They are going to have communication issues. They may have an affection, but that affection is going to be tried and tested by the politics that are still affecting them. And then I kind of wanted to blow things up in the beginning so that that became yet another stressor on their relationship, on their own sense of self. And I think you see that more with Xiri than with Phan-tu. I think Phan-tu, he's a little bit of a calmer. He's like not as much of a
yeah.
hothead that Xiri is, And so I think he sort of has settled into sort of like, look, I know I'm a representative of both the planets, but you see Xiri really take her time to realize that Eiram is hers too. And she
Yeah.
really needs to take that sort of step up to that responsibility and step up to that feeling of familial ownership. Like, I love this planet as much as I love my own, and I need to do my best. But it takes her a while to get there. And
Mhm.
it takes some, nudging from a lot of different sort of forces around her. So yeah, so that's sort of what I was thinking about the both of them. They had a lot of work to do in this book, and I did not want to downplay any of that work, but I also wanted to keep the romance there without being too heavy-handed about the romance.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a bunch of different things that were sort of in my brain when I was writing it.
Hmm. Another interesting character who has like such a like really interesting arc in both books is Axel Greylark.
Yes.
And you mentioned in your acknowledgments how closely you worked with the team on Axel's story, and both in Convergence and Cataclysm.
Mhm.
Like this is a guy who wants to run away from the responsibility of his family and like carve out his own destiny, but does it in like the most horrendous, disastrous way possible. Um,
He is. He is.
what's the
He
where's
is
the
walking chaos. That's why he's got the
yeah,
name. So
yeah, where's the mindset like in the story for Axel, like at the start, and how do you take on like such a you just said it perfectly, such a chaotic character like him?
yeah. He was probably, of all the characters in this book, he's the person that I identify the least with, just personally. He's just like, he's just such a spitfire. He's always like doing this, doing that. He's not thinking it through. He's like, he goes with his gut, but his gut is usually in like the wrong place. And so yeah, he's a chaotic person to write, but in some ways it makes it easier for me because he does not do what I personally think he should do. I just
Yeah.
imagine like, this is the right thing, Axel, and then I just make him do the opposite. And so it was like, in some ways, it was kind of easy to write him that way. And I think for that reason, he's just like a really polarizing character. Like, some people love him because he is just this sort of lovable, um, very cute, good looking space boy who is just making all the wrong choices, but he's doing it with style. And then that is so much fun to write. Like, it's fun to
Yeah.
write the roguish characters. But it's in some ways it's sort of like I already have the key, in my heart to writing them, because again, he's so not like me. Like we are
Yeah.
very, very different people. So but he was a blast to write. And I've been very pleased with how people have received how he's done in this book. And it's been like, some people are sort of like banging their head against the wall, being like, why is he doing this again?
Yeah.
And other people are like, that is so Axel, like this is exactly what I would expect. And
Yeah.
so it's been really fun to sort of like run him through the book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting too because like so much of Star Wars, like one of its most important themes in all three of its trilogies and like the number of series that there are, like the one of the biggest themes is redemption and can you come back from your like mistakes, and Axel like fits that perfectly with how frustrating it is to see him like do the wrong choice again and again and again, but
Mm-hmm.
like can he come back from this and stuff. So well, what was that, did you have kind of like any intention of like, yeah, let's kind of follow the Star Wars mold of like exploring redemption?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of knew, so spoilers ahead because we are talking about redemption, obviously. But I knew from the get-go that Axel was not going to die on the page, but I knew he was going to come close, because you have to have a sort of life and death moment sometimes to
Mm,
sort of like jog you into, to sort of shake you into the reality of like, what are you doing with your life? Like you're this close to losing it. Like stop messing, stop messing up. So I just uh, I just knew that he had other ways to redeem himself. He had other ways to show that he was going to change. And honestly, like in some ways, death is easier because you say you're sorry and then boom, you're gone, right? And
yeah.
there's no work that you have to do after the fact. People mourn you. They're left with the the ashes of all this mess that you have left behind,
Mm,
right? They're the ones that have to sort of do all the heavy lifting and sort of recover. When you let the character live, and in Axel's case, like he has to pay his dues, and it is going to be hard work for him, for a guy who lives in luxury, who's had everything handed to him, who has never worked a really hard day in his life, who like has never had dirt under his fingernails.
mm,
This is a very, very difficult ending for him. It's maybe going to be one of the hardest things he ever has to do, because we have taken away so much from him that he had privileged in all his life. And
mm,
so I don't think that we're going easy on him by giving him this redemption at all. And I
yeah.
think that in some ways it's actually, yeah, it's more torture for him. But it's one that he's sort of like, this is what happens when you tally up, a life's worth of mistakes, and people have died as a result of your
Mm,
hands, and you have caused an enormous amount of strife. Like when you have to pay for it, this is what happens.
mm,
And I think it's incredibly brave of him to turn to that and to take ownership of it. It's
mm,
so much easier for him to be like, no, I'm going to do this valiant thing and die by this blaster or something like that. I think that what he does is really, really is very brave, and it's very unlike Axel in a lot of ways, which is why it works out as a good redemption arc.
mhm. Yeah, for sure. And this book, it's we talked a little about the Jedi here, like Creighton and Ada. It's got like a ton of Jedi, which is really
Yeah.
cool. From those two characters to like the central one, Gella Nattai, who
Mm-hmm.
like she herself is really interesting, like being a bit of a solitary Jedi or wanting to be one, but also still very much like part of the order. And then you pull in all these other cool Jedi like Elna and Yaddle was a huge surprise to me. It's like, oh my god, it's a book about with Yaddle playing a prominent role.
Yes.
Like how did you pull all that off? Especially like where was the decision to like bring Yaddle into it? Because that was so cool.
I'm so pleased that I was able to bring Yaddle into it. I just sort of decided, I was like, I knew that the opportunity was there to pull Yaddle into the story. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna put her in there, but I wasn't sure how much I was really toying with, like, should she be a major player? Should she be a minor player? Just sort of like a cameo
Hmm.
kind of a thing. And so I think I had sort of originally had her as more of a cameo kind of person who sort of shows up a little bit in the beginning, shows up a little bit at the end. And I showed it to a lot of the people that I've been working with. Like, I think there was a single comment, I can't remember exactly who said it, but it was like, more Yaddle, more, more please. And I was like, yes, absolute. And so I actually had to rewrite the plot and my outline to really incorporate Yaddle into this. And as I did that, the character of Sipatarko really blossomed on the page, also because, like, for Yaddle to have a story and in the book, they're also, I knew that I wanted her paired up with a youngling, and I knew that the youngling needed a bit of a story arc as we went along. And so that was super fun, just making up Sipatarko out of thin air and just putting her on the page and seeing what she would do, and just trying to figure out how, like, a really, really gifted youngling could totally rattle the Jedi around her. I thought was really fun to play around with. So
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, today's May 4th.
yep.
So like, an important day to mark Star Wars, which, like, means so much to so many people, but, like, it's also, it means different things to different people too. Like I mentioned, people are drawn to the redemption arcs, or they're drawn to the, epic space battles, or the cool characters like Vader or Princess Leia and Han Solo. What does Star Wars mean to you personally? Like, what drew you into uh, this franchise, like, first as a fan and then as an author?
Oh my gosh. Like, there's a certain, so I grew up with Star Wars ever since I was like a really young kid. It was just sort of like always there, always in the background, just, my family members, we're all like, many of us are big Star Wars fans. And um, so it was just sort of like, I don't know, it's part of my cultural upbringing, I think, in this country, honestly. And
Mhm.
but why I love it so much, as there, I mean, there are many franchises and fandoms that I love, but Star Wars is really particularly special because it has this special alchemy of, like, you've got these heroes that you cannot, you have to just cheer for. You have these, like, really quirky and occasionally funny characters that make you laugh. You have a little bit of romance on the screen. You've got death defying acts. You've got life and death situations. It just has a little bit of everything that makes it so magical. And, on top of all of that, aside from being just sort of like, space cowboys and these, like, incredible stories in a galaxy
Yeah.
far, far away, but also there is that element of magic, right? So,
Mhm.
the Force is this one pervasive thing in all the stories that you never can quite explain, and it's always there, and it's something that just, it's so superhuman, and it takes you really out of yourself, because
Mhm.
everything that is very human based in our world is a bit of a letdown. Try to pay the bills, and your cars get into accidents, and, like, raising kids is hard, and having a job is difficult, and just our mortal bodies are just rife with
Mhm.
problems. And so you get this world where there's magic, and these magical things happen, and that just takes you out of your world, and it's the perfect escapist situation. And it's not just like one movie, it's many movies, it's many
Mhm.
books, it's many eras, it's so many different shows and so many different age groups. So it's sort of like there's something for everybody. But I think there's a reason why it is a cultural phenomenon, is that it speaks to so many people on so many levels, and it's just this magical thing. And it's been pretty, I feel just so lucky to be part of it, not just as a fan, but as somebody who's writing in it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool, for sure. And when you're not writing, you mentioned, like, working jobs and stuff. When you're not writing, you're actually work as a physician. So how do you balance that kind of, like, job with your writing, and like all the books that you've written, not just your Star Wars
Right.
Cataclysm, Star Wars short stories. Um, Even like you've mixed in like all these different genres too, like spy, medicine,
Mhm.
history. How do you balance all that?
So it does help that I work part-time as a physician. So my job is in primary care, and it does lend itself to I work a couple days a week, and I check in with work quite frequently when I'm at home writing. And somehow I've been able to manage sort of taking care of this panel of patients and teaching at my university, and it's and I but I still have plenty of time to write, so I do both. So I essentially have, I kind of want to say I have one and a half jobs, because like my physician job is sort of like part-time. My
Mm,
writing job, I would say, is full-time.
yeah.
So because it just seeps into every moment of my day,
Mhm.
and there are plenty of weekends of my year where I'm just like writing, writing, writing. And so it
Mhm.
just, I probably write more than I doctor as far as like actual hours done.
Yeah.
How do I balance it? They are very complementary to each other. They're so different from each other that they're very refreshing to
Mm,
my mental palette to do one and then the other, because they don't really overlap at all in the kind of skills that I use. So that helps. It's really easy for me to switch on to doctoring. Like I can get onto the chart and just, or go to clinic and start seeing patients, and I'm just there, and it's like
mhm.
on very easily. It's actually really, really hard for me to do the opposite. So if I had been working in clinic, or I'd been doing patient care stuff on my computer, um, for me to stop that and then go into writing mode is really hard. Like usually I have to do all this stuff to like clear my brain. I gotta like, all right, I'm gonna check emails, I'm gonna clear my inbox, I'm gonna like, check social media, I'm gonna just sort of make sure that's all like sort of squared away. And then I sit down in front of my computer, and then I'm like, oh, I'll do something else. And it just takes me forever to get into
Mhm.
writing mode. And so that's actually more of an issue. So if I have to switch back and forth constantly, it's really hard for me to get into my writing. So oftentimes, if I sort of am in a good place and I've sort of got a good rhythm going, I really try to stick with it and stay with it for a chunk of hours at a time and not be distracted by anything else, which is probably why it works very well for me to like write on weekends, write on evenings when like my doctor work isn't gonna get in the way.
Yeah.
But for me, it's worked out very well. I'm just sort of surprised that they have been so complimentary, but they have. And of course, it helps because sometimes my doctor work, like my knowledge of medicine, leads into my writing, and so that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Super convenient, um, but not always. Sort of, so it sort of depends. But it's yeah, like there's just a lot of different skill sets running around in my brain that I just use depending on what's going on.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you mentioned a while ago that a lot of your books are like period pieces and or like
Yes.
have a historical aspect.
Hmm.
You even mentioned Cataclysm has that aspect since it takes place a couple hundred years before the
Hmm.
original trilogy. So why do you like taking like history and like what is it about placing your stories in like a certain era of history?
Oh, you know what? When I was in like high school and college, I did not find history very interesting. Like I just didn't find my history classes that engaging.
Mhm.
And I kind of want to just sort of blame myself. I think my brain wasn't in a place where I found it kind of interesting. As I got older, I realized that there were so many tidbits from history that were fascinating to me. And when I learned them through in tiny little bites and like in tiny little chunks, I would find that really, really interesting. And
Mhm.
so going through medical school, for example, you spend 4 years just like, studying your brains out and learning everything you can about how to take care of people and how the human body works and how it gets sick and stuff like that. But you spend almost no time on the history of medicine. And
Mhm.
so when things like that would pop up, I would be like, oh, this is so exciting. Like, what was the history of grave robbing in the 1800s that people would use for cadavers in gross
Mhm.
anatomy? Because I went through gross anatomy, and things are people donate their bodies to medicine for the sake of research and for education. back then, you know, they were sold, they were stolen. And I found that really interesting. I was like, that is terrible. I would like to know more about that. And then that would turn into like a story. And so like The Impossible Girl is about a woman who would she would like stake out cemeteries to find out when bodies were being buried and whether or not they were going to be guarded or not. And then she and her gang would go and dig them up and sell them. And so, because apparently there used to be these like these women who would go to, they would go to graveyards and they would just go to funerals and just like sort of find out whether or not the family was wealthy enough to have a guard or not. And then so these ladies would stake it out and then sell the information and to grave robbers. And so I decided to write a story about like what is the life of one of these women like? That's such a weird job to have. And so that's how The Impossible Girl came to be. So all these different things, like learning about the history of morphine addiction, how it oftentimes in the late 1800s hit wealthier women because the morphine, the like injectable syringe kits were very expensive. And so only wealthy women were actually morphine abusers and addicts, which is really sad. But I thought, let's look into what the life of a very wealthy, privileged person who becomes addicted to morphine, like how would that happen? And it just so happened that that was the year that the Newsies strike happened. It was also the year that Bram Stoker's Dracula was released in the United States. And I was like, I'm just gonna put that all in a book. And so that's how Opium and Absinthe happened. So yeah, it just starts with like this little nugget of history. I get really fascinated and then I end up writing a book about it.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so one final question, again, since it's May 4th, what is your favorite Star Wars movie, and who's your favorite character?
So probably my favorite book is The Empire. In the original, it would be The Empire Strikes Back. Of the new ones, I'm sort of torn between, I really love The Force Awakens. I know that could be a controversial pick, but I really truly enjoyed a lot of the sort of callbacks to the earlier movies.
Yeah.
And I love Rogue One, but it took me a while to love Rogue One. Like I recognized it for being excellent writing and a very, very good movie, but it was really difficult for me to watch because when you know that how it's going to end, you know how it's going to end when you start watching it. And that just is sort of like, it's sort of pain all the way through. And now I realize and recognize that it's probably one of my favorite movies, even though to this day, it is really difficult for me to watch. Just sort of like Andor. I love Andor, but there are moments where I'm sort of like, this is so hard to watch for me because I love him and I know what's going to happen. And so anyway, the writing is like so brilliant. It's so wonderful. So yeah, I said those are sort of my favorite, some of my favorite movies from all of them, I would say.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much for speaking with me, Lydia. Star Wars Cataclysm is on bookshelves now, and it is very, very good.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So,
well, thank you for having me, and may the 4th be with you.